Welcome to another episode of Global Perspectives. I'm David Dumke here with Katie Coronado. Today we welcome Dr. Ted Reynolds, Director of the Terrorism Studies Program at the University of Central Florida, where he also teaches courses on terrorism, national security, intelligence, and cybersecurity. Dr. Reynolds' work focuses on extremist radicalism and participation, particularly within social media and other computer-mediated communication. He earned a PhD from the University of St. Andrews in Scotland. Ted Reynolds, welcome to Global Perspectives.
Thank you, David. Hi, Katie.
Hi, welcome.
So there's a lot of things we want to ask you, but in wake of the raid that successfully eliminated the self-proclaimed Caliph Baghdadi of ISIS, where is the war on terrorism today?
Well, it's evolving, as it always is. But with Baghdadi out of the way, and recently, well, immediately following that, his number two out of the way, they have now found another person to become the new leader of ISIS, who they have proclaimed the new caliph. It's really unknown what that individual's impact is going to be on the group. What we have seen is elements of al-Qaeda, particularly Zawahiri, calling for ISIS members to come to al-Qaeda. Okay, it's kind of like, hey, we're now the home team. So, but we haven't really seen a lot of movement. What we have seen are elements that were previously committed to ISIS are recommitting to ISIS, okay, claiming their allegiance to the new leader of ISIS.
When something like this happens, which we know that doesn't happen commonly, but in a case where we have now another new leader, and now they're calling another group into their realm, is there anything that we need to look out for here in the U.S.?
Well, we're always vigilant here in the U.S. I mean, with the new leader, you don't know what his plans are. You don't know how much money they still have. I mean, ISIS had considerable funds early on. Right. They found governing to be very expensive. So what we don't know is exactly how much money they have left. But how are they going to try to make an impact? They've been kicked out of Iraq. Many of their foreign fighters have dispersed. There's now what they call a terrorist diaspora. Some that have gone back to Europe have been immediately put in prison. Those that weren't put in prison are certainly being watched. So, and here in the United States, we're always looking out to make sure that something doesn't happen. So yeah, we're kind of trying to see which direction they're going to go. Are they going to become much more of a regionalized effort and not try to do anything internationally? We don't know yet.
Well, just to follow up on what Katie said, because we're talking also about doing something in the U.S. would create a sense of legitimacy for an organization that may be leaderless right now or kind of rudderless. Has this in the past, when you've seen transitions of leadership in different extremist groups, has there been a call for action as a way to get legitimacy and broader support?
Well, interestingly, previously Al-Qaeda and ISIS for the last few years have always called for attacks against the West, Western Europe and the United States. With the death of Baghdadi, there's been a lot of traffic, we call it chatter online, about these different attacks, images of D.C. burning, okay, them having President Trump in chains. So this is all propaganda. But their goal is to try to have somebody in one of these countries do some attack, because they realize they haven't been able to put together any big attacks. So what they've called for are people to do what they can, where they are, with whatever methods they have. So you've seen the truck attacks, okay, the knife attacks, small bombings in France, the truck attack in Nice. I mean, that killed 86 people. So those type of things are things that they figure they can make happen with a small number of people that are not really training with ISIS, but still share the ideology.
You mentioned some media messages that are being watched right now and observed, but can we trace those? Do we know where they're coming from, or how does that work?
Sometimes yes, sometimes no. I mean, the terrorists have gotten really good with their online communications. We just took down, the government just took down an ISIS member here in the United States that was a computer engineer, okay, providing support to ISIS. But they do use encrypted communications, so it makes it much more difficult to do that. They use Twitter, but you can, Even I use Tor when I do my terrorism research, which means my signal, you've seen on TV like when it bounces all over the planet, that's what it does. So it makes it hard to find them. Only when they're like using their cell phone, okay, which makes life real easy because those have GPS chips in them.
Well, except for WhatsApp, you mentioned earlier they also use WhatsApp.
They do, yeah.
So Katie was referring to kind of vigilance here in the United States, but this war on terrorism has gone on for quite a long time. Does it still have the same resonance with the public, and does that, if not, does that make us more vulnerable?
I have this discussion in class because post 9/11, immediately after 9/11, we went, it's like a pendulum swing. We
0
went
to
way
100,
over here
right?
to
Yeah.
the security side, okay? And the further we've moved away from 9/11 and any type of major attack, the further that pendulum has moved back to, I don't know that we'll ever get back to where we were before. I mean, I can recall going through the airport and not even walking through a metal detector, okay, and bringing my family with me. Those days are gone. But the hypervigilance that we had post 9/11, I don't see anymore when I travel. But there's techniques that are still in play, okay? They still use the body scanners. They still use the metal detectors. They still check the luggage. So, and, some countries do behavioral profiling. If you're acting strange, they're going to want to talk to you. We don't do that here. But if somebody says something in line, something inappropriate, never talk about bombings while you're in the line to get on an airplane.
Right.
Otherwise, you're going to go have a little visit.
You mentioned something really interesting, and I'm going to take this into a direction of, you talked about profiling. How do you think, from an expert perspective, can we separate the profiling from the reality of the importance of being or feeling safe?
You would think terrorist, and you have this vision in your mind of what a terrorist looks like, particularly today. But truthfully, a terrorist can look like anybody. Al-Qaeda and ISIS have sought to recruit people that don't look like Middle Easterners, okay? Other terrorist groups are just like us, okay? And we have many, many terrorist groups. Unfortunately, our focus of the last 18 years has been on jihadi terrorism, but we have right-wing terrorists, left-wing terrorists, every major religion has a terrorist group, We have the Earth Liberation Front, the Animal Liberation Front, anti-abortion terrorists. So you just never know who's going to be the group of the day that's going to try to make a statement. And that's really what this violence is. They're trying to make a statement.
Well, you're talking about extremists under a big tent, if you will.
Yes.
But where is the fine line between what constitutes terrorism and what constitutes extremism, and where are we able to determine what is a threat and what is, even if offensive, some kind of a free expression?
Yeah, that's a great question, David, because when you look at the different government agencies, none of the definitions of terrorism are the same. They all differ slightly. Some say it has to be violence against civilians. Some say it has to be violence against government and civilians. The FBI's definition now includes property damage. So that's how they were able to get like the Earth Liberation Front designated as a terrorist group. But you can have extremist views. I tell my students, being a radical is not illegal. Otherwise, a lot of people would have gone to jail in the 60s and 70s, okay? It's when those radical ideas turn to violence and you choose to no longer use the avenues of legitimate redress, through your politicians, and you can even have action, not extremist action, but political action. And I told somebody this morning, turning over a car and setting it on fire is very different than bombing somebody, okay? So there's civil unrest, and then there's terrorism. And terrorism is targeting a population, even a small population, with violence to bring about political change.
You mentioned targeting a population. Is there a young population being targeted for recruitment into these groups still?
Always.
How are they doing that?
Social media, primarily, yeah. They send out these messages daily. At one point, ISIS was sending out 100,000 tweets a day, okay? And you can imagine, the Twitterverse, and I don't know how large it is, but, the messages have the potential to reach hundreds of millions, if not billions of people. Now, whether they look at that or not is another thing, but it's out there. And the sad part is it's almost free.
What language do they send the messages out
multiple
in?
languages. So Al-Qaeda started with this magazine called Inspire, which was an English-only magazine with different directions and different religious messages. Inspire #1 contained an article on
This is a traditional magazine or online?
online magazine, yeah. No, and it was well done. Good graphics, English only. Provided an article, how to build a bomb in the kitchen of your mom. Okay, so it was the pressure cooker bomb, which we saw in the Boston bombing. Okay, so and there were like 14 or 15 different issues, and then when ISIS came into play, they had their own English magazine called Dabiq, which appeals to English speakers, but they also have French, all the different languages that they're trying to appeal to. They have translations of those magazines.
Well, let me ask, because you're talking about social media as a major source of recruitment, and I know this is also among your specialty is following extremist groups on these kinds of sites and following some of the trends. This has been such a tool of recruitment. Can we use the same cyber technology as a tool to, end the threat of or eliminate the threat of terrorism?
Well, mitigate. I don't know that you
yeah.
can eliminate it, but you can mitigate it. Because what you have to realize is there might be thousands, tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of people that say, I like this or I agree with this. But the reality is, and my research has shown, the number of people that actually engage online is about 4 to 5%. A very, very small percentage of that population, okay? And then when you look at who's engaging on a regular basis, who are the drivers of the dialogue, that number goes down into like double digits for most groups. So, one of my ideas has been that #1, we could instill messaging to those individuals to try to change the direction of the dialogue or create our own members, okay, and create a whole new focus group that can move the dialogue in a different direction. So, kind of take over. Those are techniques that, we may or may not be trying.
Well, just to kind of follow up on the same kind of messaging phenomenon, ISIS has been largely defeated in the last couple of years, at least on the battlefield and in reality. And there's a lot of young people who are recruited through some of the same techniques you're describing. Are you starting to see some of the results of interviews with these people to see what exactly it was that encouraged them to leave their homes in the UK or Europe or the United States to go join ISIS?
I've seen other academics that have been able to interview them, especially some of the younger people. And sadly, some of the folks that were there, the people that were in the region, they took their children and started indoctrinating the children. They called them the cubs of the caliphate. So now that the group is disbanded, what happened to the children? Well, they're being sent now to, for lack of a better term, de-radicalization camps. They're more like reintegration camps, and they're using what you would know as like techniques to reintegrate them into the population, music and art and things like this. I mean, these children have been raised to be terrorists.
I imagine it's similar to what they did with the Hitler Youth after World War II.
Even more extreme. I mean, I've seen video of a 5-year-old beheading his teddy bear. Okay, they've used children in 9, 10, 11-year-olds to commit executions. Okay, this is deprogramming these children to commit violence. Same thing you see with like child soldiers. Okay, so yeah, it's been problematic. Many of the people that come back don't want to be interviewed because then that could be used as evidence against them. So that's kind of like, if you're going to interview a terrorist in prison, sometimes they don't want to talk because they might get a stronger sentence, or you never know how reliable their testimony or their interview really is. They could just be, boasting. So it's difficult.
Oh, we talked about children and the recruitment of children. Do you see a trend of children here in the U.S. also potentially being recruited?
Not by them, okay? Far-right groups, yes. So the neo-Nazis, the white power movement, they actually raise their children up with this ideology. So they tell them, don't tell your friends how you really think, because they don't think the same way you do. It's really an us versus them type of idea. And so what they're raising their children with this extremist ideology and then sending them to college and trying to get them in positions of prominence, okay, which is very scary.
So you're talking about almost, these hidden agents, if you will, going up through the ranks and then suddenly showing their true colors, almost like a Manchurian candidate. of
Very much
sorts.
so. I mean, I don't want to disparage the police at all, but they could potentially go into police departments,
Sure,
government
sure.
offices, politics, okay, with this extremist ideology. That is their goal.
Of course, it's also a fine line between, if you can track people from extremist families, that doesn't necessarily mean they're, guilty of the same things their parents may have been, or just having a ideology that's repellent to people.
Correct. Yeah, I mean, you don't want to become the thought police, but you want to make sure that they aren't trying to impact policy in a way that is against our American ideals.
So what are some of the ingredients? What are some of the buzzwords? What are some of the main things that cause these young people to have, to still find extremist messages appealing?
It's interesting. For decades, there was kind of like this list of the root causes of terrorism, lack of education, poverty, things like this. And over time, academics studying terrorism have determined those really aren't what works. There was no silver bullet to figure out what causes somebody to become a terrorist, but there is one thing that's pretty generalized, and that is some type of vulnerability to an extremist message, okay? So let's say in the UK, what would make somebody born in the UK, raised in the UK, educated in the UK, decide to join Al-Qaeda or ISIS? Well, there could be a perception of inequality, okay? It could be an experience they've had with the police where they felt like they were being discriminated against. And then ISIS plays into that with their messaging. You're not a part of that society. They don't see you as a normal person. You're a third-class citizen. And then they start hearing that, and they just, they get in that echo chamber of extremist messaging, and all of a sudden it starts to resonate with them. Yeah, kind of like, back in the 60s and 70s where it was, us against the man, So that's how they kind of look at it, because there are areas where, immigrant populations are not treated the same. France is a good example. Germany, the Muslim population in Germany are not even considered citizens if they immigrated there. And their children aren't considered citizens. They're guests.
With all the manipulation of messages and brainwashing that goes on, do you think the U.S. is equipped to battle this?
Yeah, I think we are. I mean, we recognize what the problem is, and we have a very different population here. Our immigrant population, especially from that religion, came here in the 80s. The European population came post-World War II to help rebuild Europe. Most of the folks that immigrated to the United States were professionals, okay? So we don't see them joining any terrorist groups. We see their children and grandchildren, and we don't know why. I mean, again, some type of vulnerability. But the problem is not that big. And quite honestly, the problem is not that big across the Western world. When you look at ISIS, and ISIS was a fairly large force for a terrorist group, some say between 30 and 40,000, they had 10,000 foreign fighters from Europe. Okay, well, there are 40 million Muslims in Europe. Okay, so that's a fraction of 1%. Same thing here in the United States.
Earlier you spoke about the camps that are there to help deprogram the children. Is there a movement, or is there something that is in existence to prevent this from happening?
There are. When I was working in the UK, well, going to school in the UK, it was work, there was a gentleman in London that had, we called it a de-radicalization program. It was more of like from the inner city, the old midnight basketball programs, trying to keep the teenagers from falling victim to this ideology. Right. And he actually had some former terrorists that had, seen the light and left the battlefield, and they worked with these kids on understanding that, that message was not the true message, and what they were being told religiously was not real. It wasn't the truth. And they had religious scholars there that would advise them on what the true meaning of the Quran was, and he was very effective. And so, yeah, I mean, and when I asked him, how are they getting this messaging? He said, online. Every one of them, online.
So you're bringing up an interesting point. There aren't that many. The appeal isn't that broad among Muslims in Western Europe and United States. Yet, the way extremist terrorists are able to recruit is by using social media and kind of the instruments of an open society, elements of an open society. So is this a uniquely, a phenomenon that's a unique threat to open society as opposed to closed ones? Because some of the more repressive regimes, you don't have the ability to communicate like that, therefore, is there no appeal?
Yeah, I mean, one academic, and I don't remember who it was, said the safest place for a terrorist is in a democracy, okay? Because they have that freedom of speech and the freedom of movement and the freedom of communication. In Congress, somebody testified that when somebody comes into the United States, they could come across the Peace Bridge in New York from Canada. Once they get on the New York side of that bridge, they're considered an American person with all the same rights and privileges of a citizen. Okay, so our ability to monitor their communications without a warrant is limited. When we find somebody that we think is a threat, they have to go get a FISA warrant to start monitoring that individual's communication. That's the law.
And that's what I was referring to earlier when I asked you, how do we know how far we can go when we think somebody is suspicious, right? They'll look, or maybe what they're typing, and is the government monitoring what we're doing on social media if they see specific words, for example, without having more cause to
Well, it would
investigate?
be difficult for them to do that because to monitor that would mean they monitor everybody. And that's not what they're going to do. That would be a violation of everyone's civil liberties. So, and that's the problem. We see people that do these attacks, and then we find out after the fact, they had this social media presence. And sadly, nobody reported it. So for the government's perspective, and I've done this type of work, the issue is always, even if we're monitoring an overseas group, and monitoring their social media traffic, the concern is, well, what if there's an American in that loop? Okay, now you're violating the civil liberties. Okay, and my comment is, well, wouldn't you want to know that? But that doesn't go very far with the government lawyers. But at the same time, we have to, I think, start looking to these social media platforms to regulate their content. They have the algorithms to look for these words and phrases, and that's part of it. Is certain keywords and phrases are typically used. Contact with certain facilitators overseas happens quite a bit. So the concept of lone wolf is not really true. They're always typically talking to someone else, somewhere else, okay? It's just that they didn't go get training anywhere else. They just stayed here. So yeah, and that's something we have to work through because the last thing we want is everybody to be monitored.
Sure. Well, let me ask you, we just have a couple more minutes here. We want to ask, so where are we going now with the war? And if you were going to predict the next phase of the war on terrorism, what do you think, what should we look for? What's going to be happening?
I think more of what we've just seen with, the isolation of Baghdadi and the number 2 and even arresting his wife. We need to, I think what we're going to see is the government trying to identify those individuals that are at the top of the food chain and remove them from the battle space and kind of cutting the head off the snake. Because at some point you're going to have somebody that's not capable of leading the group in the direction that was originally intended. And those things are going to be done by special operators, okay, using all of the capabilities of our intelligence community to, bring an end to those groups, and we'll just take them as they come.
Is this going to continue to be perceived as a military threat, or is this more of where is the threat lie?
Yeah,
You
I think
address this
depending on the country, here in the United States, it's much more of a political, social event, trying to make sure people don't feel threatened by the government. Certain countries, if we're in a situation where we're being attacked, even if our soldiers are being attacked, that's going to be a military operation. It's not a police operation. Here in the United States, it's a police operation, okay? We can't have the military running around the United States looking for terrorists, but that's a police operation. So, and in terrorism, there's 2 models, the police model and the law enforcement model and the military model. And we use both depending on where it's going on.
Do you think that we need to be more involved overseas to make sure that we're keeping the terrorism out from the U.S.?
Well, I think that anybody that wants to threaten the United States, we need to be concerned with that, and we probably will have folks there monitoring that. There are certainly groups that have no intent on attacking the United States. There's a group in the Philippines, Abu Sayyaf, they don't have any desire to attack the United States. So we kind of we help train the Filipinos, but we leave them alone. So yeah, it just depends on the threat to the country.
But of course, the threat one day in one area can then later morph into a threat to the country. So you could have had the same kind of threat assessment to the Taliban, right?
Right.
Correct?
Yeah, and that's going to really depend on the information that comes through our intelligence community and all the communications that we intercept and the human assets that we have on the ground to find out what's going on and who's in charge and what are they saying.
So at 30-second wrap, what do you tell the Central Florida community about what's next with terrorism and our situation?
Well, I mean, we're moving along. I mean, I live here, so I think we're fairly safe here in the United States. We are looking to make sure that big things don't happen, but case in point is the Pulse nightclub shooting. You never know when somebody's going to decide to commit an attack, and as I've told people, even though we don't have these big attacks, it only takes one person to do a lot of damage. So we have to be vigilant.
Vigilance.
Exactly.
Thank you, Ted Reynolds. We really appreciate your comments today. And thank you. We will see you next time on Global Perspectives.